Second day here on the job at Park Lake, I met a guy named Wendell McDaniel. He is dealing with a brain tumor, and we went over to visit with him. And I remember that day I visited with him, he had a raspy cough. And as I left, I told Wanda, his wife, listen, if anything happens with Wendell, man, let me know because I'm your pastor now. The very next morning, Wanda called me and said I had to take Wendell into the hospital last night in the emergency room, and they're only giving him a couple days to live. And I was shocked. The raspy cough was actually tumors that had developed and was choking him to death. 4 days later, he was dead. What I was shocked about the whole scenario, and seeing him die at the end was horrible. I was so heartbroken for Wanda. But really what I was shocked about was that Wendell had been dealing with cancer for 30 plus years. He'd been dealing with tumors his whole entire adult life. Suffering doesn't always happen and you have a bad day and then it's over and you got to deal with the consequences. Suffering sometimes happens over prolonged periods of time. And that's what happened with Job. Job had an epic bad day. But the suffering that he had to deal with physically, his boils, those lasted for months. It wasn't just a short period of time. He was dealing with those for months. Several weeks after Job's epic bad day, several weeks after the boils had broken out all over his body, he's still suffering. His friends show up. He's got 4 friends that come and try to minister to him. And they spent an entire 7 days not doing anything, just sitting there in complete total silence. Finally, after that 7th day, Job breaks out, and he says in Job chapter 3, verse 1 through 3, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. He said, may the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said, a boy is born. That day may it turn into darkness. Job had finally had enough. He was like, Lord, why am I even born? You see in verse 11, why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? Job had had enough, and he was just like, oh, why was I even created if I was going to suffer like this? And his friends, they break their silence. And three of them respond in a really interesting way. His first friend responded by saying that Job was suffering because he must have sinned. His theology said that obviously good people are blessed, bad people are cursed. And so if Job is seemingly cursed, he must have sinned. His second friend jumped on the same bandwagon and said the reason why you're still suffering is because you're not admitting to some hidden sin. So Job, admit to your sin and God will release you from this suffering. And then the third friend imagines the sins that Job must have done to make God this mad at him so that Job would be stricken down like he was. And what was interesting about this, that these imagined sins that this third friend accuses Job of, was that it reflects that his theology was really inadequate. His doctrine and his theology was inadequate to deal with the reality that sometimes good people just suffer. That's the question I think we need to ask ourselves. Is our theology, is it adequate to understand the complexities of suffering in our world? We're going to deal with that this morning. I think you're going to be interested in some of the points that are brought out about suffering, blessing, good, and evil.